Hello buddies, welcome to our channel Learning NCERT. So today in this video we will discuss about chapter 7 from class 10 science control and coordination. So if you have not gone through our introduction and guidelines video, please go through because it was mentioned there how to follow these sessions and take a pen or pencil or highlighter to highlight the points as going on in the video and adjust the screen brightness here for the convenience of your eyes and do not trouble. So you can scan this QR code that is shown here if you want the e-PDF of this chapter from the NCERT site. Okay, so let us begin our session. So chapter 7 control and coordination of a class 10 science. In the previous chapter, we looked at life processes involved in the maintenance of functions in living organisms. So what are the main functions of the life processes? They are involved in the maintenance of the organism's body and they help in survival of the body. There were we had started with a notion we all have that if we see something moving, it is alive. So obviously, when we see something moving, we feel they are alive. But there are some things which doesn't move, but still they are alive. Okay, some of these movements are in fact the result of growth, as in plants. So in case of plants, there is no visible movement or the physical movement of the body. But how can we say a plant is living or it is undead? We can say by its growth, whether it's producing new leaves, new stems, new branches, fruits are growing or not. So in these ways we can say that a plant is alive. A seed germinates and grows, and we can see that the seedling moves over the course of a few days. It pushes the soil aside and comes out, isn't it? So this is the mechanism how the seed is going to sprout out from the soil in which it was sown. But if its growth were to be stopped, these movements would not happen, isn't it? So then it would become a dead thing. Some movements, as in many animals and some plants, are not connected with growth, isn't it? So some movements are not connected with the growth of the body. They are not connected with the growth of the body. And let us consider a cat running. Okay, so this cat is running, it is moving, but we can't say it is related to its growth. And children playing on swings, buffaloes chewing cud, and these are not movements caused by growth. So these movements are just for the body to search for the food or search for the mate or for the protection or in searching of the prey or something, isn't it? But these movements are not related with the growth of the body. Why do we associate such visible movements with the life? A possible answer is that we think of movement as a response to a change in the environment of the organism, isn't it? We see a movement as an response to the something information or a signal in the organism's environment or in its habitat. The cat may be running because it has seen a mouse. Not only that, we also think of movement as an attempt by living organisms to use changes in their environment to their advantage. So, what is the other role? One is so for the response of the change in the environment, and the further other important thing why organisms perform movement as an attempt to the change in their environment, isn't it? So, it is another second thing why organisms do move. Plants grow out into the sunshine. Children try to get pleasure and fun out of swinging. Buffaloes chew cud to help break up tough food so as to be able to digest it better. So when bright light is focused on our eyes or when we touch a hot object, we detect the change and respond to it with a movement in order to protect ourselves. So this is one of the mode for the movement. So why do we move? Because to protect. Okay, so one of the reasons for the movement. If we think a bit more about this, it becomes apparent that all this movement in response to the environment is carefully controlled. So all the movements in response to the environment are carefully controlled. So underline this point. Okay, each kind of a change in the environment evokes an appropriate movement in response. Okay, so every change will be resulted in the response by the organism. So it might be a movement of the body or some other movements inside the body which might not be even visible. When we want to talk to our friends in class, we whisper rather than shouting loudly, isn't it? So what you know what happens when you shout loudly in the class? Clearly, the movement to be made depends on the event that is triggering it. So why we need to move or why we need to act is based upon the cause for that action. So if the cause for the action, when you are playing in the ground and your friend is making some other thing apart, so when you if you want to call your friends, you need to make loud noise, isn't it? You need to shout in the ground. But when you want to talk to your friend, you need to whisper. So depending upon the need or the necessity for the movement, your body will be responding accordingly. Therefore, such controlled movement must be connected to the recognition of various events in the environment, followed by only the correct movement in response. In other words, living organisms must use systems providing control and coordination. In keeping with the general principles of body organization, in multicellular organisms, specialized tissues are used to provide these control and coordination activities. So, what is the basic principle of a multicellular organism? So, as its body has many several cells, so each group of cell will be specialized for a specific function they need to perform. So, as you have learned in the life process chapter, kidneys, which consist of nephrons, are specialized for filtration of the blood, isn't it? And accumulation of the waste materials that are generated in the body. And if we consider the tissues in the alimentary canal, they are made for absorption of the food or digestion of the food or secretion of the digestive enzymes that are required. So in the same case, so for the activities like control and coordination in multicellular organisms, another specialized tissue is used. So let us see what type of these specialized tissues that are used. So animals nervous system. In animals, control and coordination are provided by nervous and muscular tissues. So what are the tissues that are involved in control and coordination? So they are nervous tissue and the muscular tissue. So in the chapter 6 of ninth class, tissues chapter, you will be learning about nervous tissue and muscular tissues. So there are three types of muscular tissues, isn't it? So those three types of muscular tissues are, so in the body I'm typing here, so make a note in your book. So types of muscular tissues. Okay, so there are three types of muscular tissues. The first one is the smooth muscle, isn't it? The smooth muscle, or it is also called as unstriated muscle, as its body doesn't have striations. Okay, this is unstriated. Okay, muscles. Okay, and the second type of muscle in our body is of the, yeah, striated muscle, or which is also called as skeletal muscle. Okay, it is called as skeletal muscles, which are associated with the skeletons of our body or the bones of our body, which helps in the voluntary movement. So we can control the movements of the muscle tissue that are associated with the skeletons. And the third type is the present in the heart, that is cardiac muscle. Okay, so it is cardiac muscle that is present in the heart and helps in the continuous beating of the heart. So these are the, okay, three types of the muscular tissue that are found in our body. Okay, so and the nervous tissue are the functional and structural units of neurons. Okay, neurons are the functional and structural units of nervous tissue. Okay, so what are neurons? These are the functional and structural units of nervous tissue. Okay, just like nephrons are the functional and structural units. Okay, yeah, let us move back. So which we have studied in class 9. So touching a hot object is an urgent and dangerous situation for us because it would damage the tissues. we need to detect it and respond to it. How do we get the how do we detect that we are touching a hot object? All information from our environment is detected by the specialized tips of some nerve cells. So from where we are going to detect the impulse or the signal from the environment, it is from the specialized tips of the nerve cells, which are called as synapses. These receptors are usually located in our sense organs such as inner ear. Okay, what are the sense organs that are present? So they are inner ear, and we had a nose and a tongue for the tasting. Okay, and just skin for touching, and we had eyes for seeing, isn't it? So gustatory receptors will detect taste, while olfactory receptors will detect the smell. Okay, so gustatory receptors are called for the tasting and substance. So we will list out them. So make a note here. Okay, so write all the things. Gustatory. Okay, gustatory receptors are for taste. Okay, and olfactory receptors are for smell. Okay, and photoreceptors in the retina are for the are for light sensitivity. Okay, they will be sensing the light, and these light energy will be converted into the chemical signals, and that will be processed by the brain, and we are going to see the image of the objects. Okay, and we also have receptors like tacto receptors. Okay, tacto receptors are for touch. Okay, they are for the touch, tacto receptors. Okay, and animals will would also have mechanoreceptors, which sends the mechanical vibrations or the signals through their body. Okay, so that's about so gustatory receptors will detect taste, while olfactory receptors will detect smell. Okay, so this information acquired at the end of the dendritic tip of a nerve cell sets off a chemical reaction that creates an electrical impulse. Okay, so now this electrical impulse that is created by the dendritic ends will be traveling through the nerve cell. So that is how the electrical impulse or the signal of the sense of the response will be transmitted. This impulse travels from the dendrite to the cell body, and then along the axon to its end, so to the ends of the axon. So this information is going to be travel. Okay, at the end of the axon, the electrical impulse sets off the release of some chemicals. Okay, so these chemicals I observe in the diagram here. So here we can see those. Okay, so here, so this is the ending of an nerve cell, isn't it? And this region, just like the knob, is called as a synaptic knob. Okay, and these are the various small structures that what you are seeing here are called as a synaptic vesicles, and these synaptic vesicles will have the chemicals called as neurotransmitters. Okay, they are called as neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters will be released. Okay, so these are neurotransmitters that will be released into the next neuron. Okay, so when these move from one neuron to the another neuron, the impulse or the electrical signal will be transmitted. Okay, for example, if this nerve ending is connected to a muscle, yeah, just like the case of here, so what would happen? So this muscle will get the electrical impulse or the chemical impulse from this neuron, and the muscle will be acting according to the signal that is received by the neuron. Okay, so that's how the information will be processed. So now let us move back. So just go through the figure of the nerve cell. A nerve cell has an nucleus, isn't it? So it has a nucleus, a cell body, And the nerve cell body will have all the cell organelles just like an common cell, and these are the dendrites, and the axons were here. Okay, and this is the nerve ending, and the sheet like structure that what you are seeing on the axon is called as myelin sheath. Okay, it is called as myelin sheath. Myelin sheath helps in the fast conduction of the electrical impulse through the axon. Okay, and the space between the myelin sheaths that is called as nodes of Ranvier. Okay, they are called as nodes of Ranvier. Okay, now let us back to the thing. At the end of the axon, the electrical impulse sets off the release of some chemicals. These chemicals across the gap or synapse and start a similar electrical impulse in a dendrite of the next neuron. Okay, so this is the process from one neuron to the another neuron, and this doesn't take too long time. It just happens in fractions of second. So this is the general scheme of how nervous impulses travel in the body. A similar synapse finally allows delivery of such impulses from neurons to other cells such as muscle cells or a gland. Okay, so these cells that give an effect of the electrical impulse are called as effector cells. Okay, that give the effect of the impulse are called as effector. So now these effectors may be a gland for the secretion of a specific hormone or a muscle for the specific movement of the body. Okay, it is thus no surprise that nervous tissue is made up of an organized network of nerve cells or neurons, and these are specialized for conducting information via electrical impulses from one part of the body to the another part of the body. So this is the major principle that is involved in the nervous tissue. Okay, so look at the figure 7.1a and identify the parts of a neuron where information is acquired. So in the nerve cell where information is acquired, it is at the starting of the neuron, that is dendrites. Okay, so dendrites acquire the information, and through which information travels as an electrical impulse is the axon. So through the axon, information will be traveling in the form of electrical impulse, and where this impulse must be converted into a chemical signal for onward transmission is at the nerve endings or at the synapses. Okay, so these are the answers. So these are the parts of the neuron where information acquired is at the dendrite. Okay, and where the impulses are transmitted is the axon body. Okay, this is the axon body, and where the nerve impulse will be transmitted to the next neuron are the nerve endings. Okay, so this is about them. So let us move to the next. Is there a difference in how sugar and food taste if your nose is blocked? Yes, obviously when you are suffering from cold, uh, commonly our olfactory receptors that doesn't work. So it is not possible for us to taste what type of food we are eating, isn't it? So when our olfactory receptors are not working, even our gustatory receptors are also not going to work. So this means that they are associated with each other. Read and talk about possible explanations of these kinds of differences. Do you come across a similar situation when you have a cold? Exactly, we are going to face the same thing when we are suffering from cold. Yes or no? Next, what happens in reflex actions? So let us see what are these reflex actions and why do they happen and how do they are processed. Reflex is a word we use very commonly when we talk about some sudden action in response. So what is an reflex action? It is an sudden action in response to something in the environment. We say, I jumped out of the way of the bus reflexly, or I pulled my hand back from the flame reflexly, or I was so hungry my mouth started watering reflexly. It means, so these are all words that are written here reflexly are simply we can say them as unintentionally or suddenly or unknowingly. Okay, so these things are going to happen unknowingly. So we are not going to sense them whether we need to do them or not, but they happen without our command over them. So what exactly do we mean? A common idea in all such examples is that we do something without thinking about it or without feeling in control of our reaction. So what are these reflex actions? These are the things that we will be doing without thinking about them and without feeling in control of our reaction. It happens unintentionally or involuntarily. Okay. Yet, these are situations where we are responding with some action to changes in our environment. How is control and coordination achieved in such situations? Let us consider this further. Take one of our examples, touching a flame in an urgent and dangerous situation for us, or in fact for any animal. How would we respond to this? One seemingly simple way is to think consciously about the pain and the possibility of getting burnt and therefore move our hand. An important question then is, how long will it take us to think all this? The answer depends on how we think. If nerve impulses are sent around the way we have talked about earlier, then thinking is also likely to involve the reaction of such impulses. So, from moving the information from one neuron to the another neuron, one synapse to the another synapse. So, this information has to be traveled from the, for example, consider the tip of your hand to the brain, and then the information will be processed, and then the response must be coming from the brain to the tip for the movement away from the flame. So this is a very long process. So by the time this happens, we might have get burnt or we might be wounded, isn't it? So for this, the answer will be depending upon the situation. If nerve impulses are sent around the way we have talked about earlier, then thinking is also likely to involve the creation of such impulses. Thinking is a complex activity, so it involves many parts of the brain, it involves many nerve cells, it involves many impulses or the responses. So it is a complex activity. So it is bound to involve a complicated interaction of many nerve impulses from many neurons. It doesn't happen with one single neuron or one single part of the brain. So it needs to involve many neurons, and even in case of some complex activities, many parts of the brain are also involved. If this is the case, it is no surprise that the thinking tissue in our body consists of a dense networks of intricately arranged neurons. So our thinking tissue, so what the term that is used for brain, here it was used thinking tissue, where the process of thinking and processing of the information occurs. So now this thinking tissue in our body, it consists of dense neurons, of intricately arranged neurons. Okay, this must be an very dense or complicated network of neurons must be consisting in it. It sits in forward end of the skull and receives a signal from all over the body, which it thinks about before responding to them. Okay, so before what it was said here, before responding to them. So before our brain responds to something, response or an a stimuli or a signal from the environment, it needs to process the information. So that is what you mentioned here is it thinks about it. So thinking means processing of the information. So what type of action to be taken, or what type of tissue has to be affected, what type of tissue must be or the part of the body must be in action for that response. Okay, obviously in order to receive these signals, this thinking part of the brain in the skull must be connected to nerves coming from various parts of the body. Yes, isn't it? Unless and until all the electrical wires in our homes are connected with each other, are we going to connect the electricity throughout our home? It is not possible, isn't it? So in the same case, if our brain has to respond, if our brain has to process the information, its nerves has to be connected and spread throughout the body parts. Yes, so similarly, if this part of the brain is to instruct muscles to move, nerves must carry the signal back to different parts of the body. So what happens, for example, if one of your friends he pokes you with a pen while when you are in the class. So when he pokes, your palm will be sensing that deep sensation. So the signal will be sent to the brain, and brain will be recognizing that someone is poking you. And what happens again, the signal from the brain for the action will be through the nerves and to the muscles of your hand, and your hand will be moving away from the point of poke, isn't it? So this is the entire process that needs to be happened. So sending the information, processing it, and receiving back for the action. If all of this is to be done when we touch a hot object, it may take enough time for us to get burned. So just we have said previously, so when all this process happens and by the time the signal comes to your muscles and we need to move away, already a burnt might be happen, isn't it? So for this, to prevent or protect the body from such an harmful thing, we had reflex actions. Okay, how does the design of the body solve this problem? Rather than having to think about the sensation of heat, if nerves that detect heat were to be connected to the nerves that move muscles in a simpler way, the process of detecting the signal or the input and responding to it by an output action might be completed quickly. So just like acting like in local bodies, instead of writing the letter or a mail to the chief minister of a particular state, so what happens, the local collector will be solving the problem. So it solves the problem in a very short span when compared to the long process reaching to all the capital cities and coming back with the information letter, isn't it? So the body solves this by connecting the nerves that sense heat to the muscles of the body in a simpler way. So this is the solution for this long process, just like simply taking like a shortcut path, isn't it? The process of detecting the signal or the input and responding to it by an output action might be completed quickly. So by this simple way of connecting between the nerves and the muscles where the sensation of the heat occurs, so what does the body do? It signals or it completes the action quickly. Such a connection is commonly called reflex arc. So this is not circle because the information is not moving to the brain, and from the again from the brain it is not coming to the muscle. It is not an circulation process, just like the case happens in a double circulation, isn't it? But what happens, it is an arc, means incomplete circle. Okay, the nerves will be sensing the heat, signal will be sent to the muscle, and muscle will be in action. Okay, and from again nerve to muscle, muscle to nerve, this entire cyclical process doesn't occur here. Okay, this is just an half process or half circle. So that is the reason it is called as an reflex arc. Okay, did you follow this term, reflex arc? Where should such reflex arc connections be made between the input nerve and the output nerve? The best place, of course, would be at the point where they first meet each other. Nerves from all other body meet in a bundle in the spinal cord on their way to the brain. So where do all the nerves will be meeting? They will be meeting at the bunch of nerves called as spinal cord. Okay, reflex arcs are formed in the spinal cord itself, although the information input also goes on to reach the brain. Okay, though the information reaches the brain, but the action will be taken quickly from the reflex arc. Of course, reflex arcs have evolved in animals because the thinking process of the brain is not fast enough. So this is we think we will be thinking so fast, but reflex arcs are required for us because we are not thinking as fast as the body needs to think. Okay, still there is an disadvantage with our thinking process then. So this is a fun fact to know, isn't it? So in fact, many animals have very little or none of the complex neuron network needed for thinking. So it is quite likely that reflex arcs have evolved as sufficient ways of functioning in the absence of true thought processes. As in the case of many animals, there is insufficient development of the nervous tissue. So that is the reason, to meet the requirements of the body. So in these cases like protection of the body, the reflex arc has been evolved. Okay, now let us continue. However, even after complex neuron networks have come into existence, reflex arcs continue to be more efficient for quick responses. Okay, so these reflex arcs are much faster than our brain to process and to think about the responses or the signals that we get from the environment. Yeah, this is quite interesting. Yeah, underline this statement. Okay, let us now observe the figure. So this is the way the receptors are heat and pain receptors in the skin. Okay, so what are the receptors? So these are the heat and pain receptors in the skin. So when an heat or the pain response or the stimuli comes in touch with the receptor, this receptor will be sending information through the sensory nerve. Means the neuron which senses the information is called a sensory neuron. Okay, now this sensory neuron will be carrying information from the receptors to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord here the quick response will be happening, and from this quick response again the action will be back to the muscle where the effect is seen. That is the reason muscles are called as effector. Okay, they are called as effector, muscle in the arm. Okay, and this is the spinal cord, so which is the part of the central nervous system. And again as the action is taken here from the reflex arc, the information will also be processed to the brain. Okay, can you now trace the sequence of events which occur when a bright light is focused on your eyes? Yeah, the same case occurs. So photoreceptors, from the photoreceptors through the nerves to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord to the iris muscles. Okay, did you learn from the human and the colorful world chapter? So our eyes consists of the muscles which help in the regulating the amount of light entering into the eyeball, isn't it? So iris muscles will be responding to the brightness, isn't it? When we are looking at a dull lighted objects, pupil will be dilated. In the case of the bright objects, pupil will be constricted. So it depends upon completely on the movement of the iris muscles, isn't it? So that's the case happens in case of the when a light is focused on your eyes. So now let us see this thinking tissue, the human brain. So is reflex action the only function of the spinal cord? Obviously no, there are many functions associated with the spinal cord. Obviously not. Okay, reflex action is not only the sole purpose of the spinal cord, it is just one of the functions. Since we know that we are thinking beings, so what? Wow, so humans are described here as thinking beings. Okay, human beings are also thinking beings. Spinal cord is made up of nerves which supply information to think about. So they will be supplying information to the brain to think about. Thinking involves more complex mechanisms and neural connections, isn't it? So thinking involves more complex mechanisms and neural connections. So these are concentrated in the brain. So where are these neural connections and complex mechanisms are going to happen? They are constituted in the brain. So these are concentrated in the brain, which is the main coordinating center of the body. So just like the CPU of a system, brain is the processing unit or the main coordinating center. The brain and the spinal cord constitute the central nervous system. So what are the components of the nervous system? The brain and the spinal cord are the central neural system. Okay, they receive information from all parts of the body and integrate them. Okay, so not just making response actions, but they will be integrating the information. So depending upon this, whether only one part of the body has to respond or other parts of the body also need to respond, it will be determined by this thinking process and integration. Okay, we also think about our actions. Writing, talking, moving a chair, clapping at the end of a program are examples of voluntary actions which are based on deciding what to do next. So, the brain also has to send messages to the muscles. So, by the time a person of your class completes delivering his speech, you will be ready with the claps, isn't it? Already, your hands will be ready in position to clap for that for your friend, isn't it? So the same case, it will be thinking what to do next. The brain also has to send messages to the muscles, isn't it? The muscles must be ready to clap or to join the hands, isn't it? So this is the second way in which the neurons system communicate with the muscles. Okay, so one is action to the response directly, and the other thing is what to do next, means in advance. One is for the quick action, another thing for the in advance things. Okay, the communication between the central nervous system and the other parts of the body is facilitated by the peripheral nervous system consisting of cranial nerves arising from the brain and the spinal nerves arising from the spinal cord. Okay, here are the two types of nerves, isn't it? So one type of nerves are the cranial nerves. So these cranial nerves are arising from the brain, and the spinal nerves are arising from the spinal cord. Okay, so remember the two types of nerves. Okay, the brain thus allows us to think and take actions based on that thinking. As you will expect, this is accomplished through a complex design with the different parts of the brain responsible for integrating different inputs and outputs. The brain has three such major parts or regions. Okay, so what are the major parts? So there are three major parts of the brain or the regions. Okay, so these three major parts are namely the front part of the brain is called as the forebrain. Okay, it is called as forebrain, and the brain part that is behind the forebrain is called as the midbrain, which is inside the brain with the soft tissue, and the part of the brain that is behind or the back region of the skull is called as hindbrain. Okay, forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. So these are the three types of the brain, three parts of the brain regions. Okay, the forebrain is the main thinking part of the brain, very important. So which is the main thinking part of the brain? Forebrain is the main thinking part of the brain. It has regions which receive sensory impulses from various receptors. Separate areas of the forebrain are specialized for hearing, smell, sight, and so on. So in this forebrain itself, there are several other regions where various activities like hearing, smell, seeing, and various skills are also associated with them. There are separate areas of association where this sensory information is interpreted by putting it together with information from other receptors as well as with information that is already stored in the brain. So what is the other thing? There are other areas that are associated with this forebrain, isn't it? So where the sensor information is interpreted by putting it together with information from the other receptors. So one thing is by providing information from the receptors that are already in the brain and having the information from the receptors. So based on all this, a decision is made about how to respond, and the information is passed on to the motor areas which control the movement of voluntary muscles, for example our legs. So based upon these information, what going to happen, a decision will be taken how to respond, and the information is passed on to the motor areas which control the movement of the voluntary muscles, for example like our leg muscles or the hand muscles. Okay, however, certain sensations are distinct from seeing or hearing. Okay, how do we know that we have eaten enough? The sensation of feeling full is because of a center associated with hunger, which is in separate part of the forebrain. Okay, the sensation for the other functions of the body are associated with the other parts of the forebrain. Okay, now study the label diagram of the human brain. We have seen that the different parts have specific functions. Can we find out the function of each part? So look for the different parts of the brain. So here it is the cerebrum. Okay, the cerebrum is called as the major portion of the brain is the cerebrum. Okay, and this cranium is also called as skull. Okay, cranium has three layers which protect the brain. Okay, including the skull. Okay, and this is the midbrain which is inside, and this is the forebrain which is in the front part, and the hindbrain will be the back. Okay, and so observe the midbrain. We had a gland called hypothalamus and pituitary gland, and hindbrain consists of this pons, medulla, and cerebellum. Okay, so these are the three parts: medulla, cerebellum, pons. Medulla is also called as medulla oblongata. Okay, medulla oblongata along with the pons and cerebellum, it forms a hindbrain, so which is beneath the major portion of the brain. So as you can see, the major portion of the brain constitutes of the forebrain, which has a complex nerve connections in it. Okay, and the spinal cord is other part of the central nervous system. So this entire brain, including spinal cord, is called as central neural system. Okay, central nervous system or central neural system, CNS. Okay, and then let us look at other use of the word reflex. So we will see other use of this word. So that we have talked about in the introduction. Our mouth waters when we see food we like without our meaning to. Our hearts beat without our thinking about it. In fact, we cannot control these actions easily by thinking about them even if we wanted to do. Okay, so what happens if you want to stop the food in your esophagus? Is it possible? It is not possible to stop the food in between the esophagus, isn't it? So whether we control it or not, the food will be passing from the buccal cavity to the esophagus without our control, and the food will be moving inside the intestines without our control. So there are several activities like this. For example, our heart, if I want to make my heart a bit faster or slower, it is not in my hands, isn't it? It depends upon the condition of the body or the condition of the work that my body is performing. Okay, our hearts beat without our thinking about it. In fact, we cannot control these actions easily by thinking about them even if we wanted to. Okay, do we have to think about or remember to breathe or digest food? No, we need not remember about them. So in between the simple reflex actions like change in the size of the pupil or the thought out actions such as moving a chair, there is another set of muscle movement over which we do not have any thinking control. Many of these involuntary actions are controlled by the midbrain and hindbrain. So what are these involuntary functions or the actions are controlled by midbrain or hindbrain? Exactly. All these involuntary actions including blood pressure, salivation and vomiting are controlled by the medulla in the hindbrain. So what is the function of the medulla? It controls the sensation of vomiting or salivation, or include increasing or decreasing the blood pressure according to the condition of the body. We need not think about them, or we need not bother about them. They will be occurring as per the body requirements, isn't it? So think about activities like walking in a straight line, riding a bicycle, picking up a pencil. These are possible due to a part of the hindbrain called cerebellum. Okay, so when we need an precise action, or when we need an keen sense of action, we there is an involvement of hindbrain called cerebellum in it. So when we want to while riding a bicycle, we need to balance the body. When we want to walk in a straight line, we need to balance our body. So when we want to pick up a pencil, we need to have a precise control over the body, or to pick up a needle or an small things that are down, isn't it? So we need a precise action for them. So these precise actions are the balancing actions are done by the cerebellum of the body, of the brain. Okay, it is responsible for precision of voluntary actions in maintaining the posture and balance of the body. So this is the important function of cerebellum. Yes, make an underline and put a star mark here. So it is responsible for precision of voluntary actions and maintaining the posture and balance of the body. It is just like a gyroscope of the body. Cerebellum will be acting like an gyroscope, isn't it? Imagine what would happen if each of these events failed to take place if we were not thinking about it. So obviously when we want to walk in a straight line or ride on bicycle or pick up any sensitive or balancing things or maintain the posture, we would obviously fail in maintaining the balance of the body. So this is the same case happen when we were drunk too much, isn't it? The cerebellum will be affected when a person drinks beyond his capability and the body becomes unconscious. So a drunkard person, he can't walk with a stiff position, isn't it? With a stiff posture, he can't maintain the balance of his body because his cerebellum will be temporarily ceased to function or unable to maintain the body. Okay, so this is one of the example what would happen if these regions were not there to maintain the functions. Okay, so let us see. So we have seen about the functions of the brain regions and the neural tissue, how these information are transmitted. And another important thing is not just utilization of the tissue is important, but for the body, protection of the tissue is also important. Okay, so let us see what how are these tissues are protected. A delicate organ like brain, which is so important for a variety of activities, needed to be carefully protected, isn't it? So this is a delicate organ, isn't it? So it is so soft. So brain tissues are so soft. It will be like an jelly. Okay, so these jelly like tissue inside the brain must be protected very well. Okay, for this, the body is designed so that the brain sits inside a bony box. So this can also be called as a brain case or brain box. Okay, a cranium or the skull and several other terms were there. Okay, so the body, in order to protect the brain, the body has an bony box. So inside this bony box, the brain is fixed. So inside the box, the brain is contained in a fluid-filled balloon which provides further shock absorption. So to prevent the brain from the shock damage, it needs shock absorption, isn't it? So the any mechanical pressure that was or the force that was applied on the skull, it will be absorbed by these fluid-filled balloons. Okay, if you run your hand down the middle of your back, you will feel a hardy, bumpy structure. This is the vertebral column or backbone which protects the spinal cord. Okay, the spinal cord is protected inside this vertebral column. Okay, inside each vertebral column or the vertebral backbone, there is an narrow lumen. Okay, through this lumen or the canal, the spinal cord will be passing down from the head, from the bottom of the skull to the tip of our pelvic region. Okay, now how does the nervous tissue cause action? Okay, so far we have been talking about nervous tissue and how it collects information, sends it around the body, processes information, makes decisions based on information, and conveys a decision to muscles for action. So here is a small summary of the actions that are done by the nervous tissue. So what are they? Nervous tissue, it collects information. Okay, first thing is it collects information. Okay, and then sends information around the body. Okay, this is another function. And then processes information, so what action to be taken or what responses has to be added. So that is about the processing of the information, and makes decisions based on the information, and conveys the decisions to the muscles for action or for the effect to the effector region, isn't it? So these are the various functions that are done by the nervous system in our body. In other words, when the action or movement is to be performed, muscle tissue will do the final job. Okay, so which tissue in the body will be doing the final job for the action or for a movement? Muscle tissue is the final job doer for the case of action or muscle. So underline these lines. How do animal muscle moves? Okay, when a nerve impulse reaches the muscle fiber must move. How does a muscle cell move? The simplest notion of movement at the cellular level is that muscle moves will move by changing their shape so that they shorten. So the next question is, how do muscles change their shape? The answer must lie in the chemistry of cellular components. Muscle cells have special proteins that change both their shape and their arrangement in the cell in response to nervous electrical impulses. Okay, so muscles muscle cells will have proteins. Okay, so these proteins are going to change their shape and arrangement in response to the nervous electrical impulse. Okay, so we had two types of muscle proteins. So one is a thin muscle protein, another one is a thick. So they are commonly called myosin and actin muscles. Okay, so muscle cells will have the proteins called as myosin and actin muscles. Okay, so these two proteins will be coordinated inside the muscle cell, and as per the signal that is received from the nervous tissue, these muscles will be changing their shape and arrangement for the requirement. Okay, when this happens, new arrangements of these proteins give the muscle cells a shorter form. Okay, so when these actions or these changes and arrangements happen, what happens? The muscle proteins or the muscle cells will be in their shorter form. Remember when we talked about muscle tissue in class 9, there were different kinds of muscles, such as broadly classifying, we had voluntary muscles. Okay, skeletal muscles comes under voluntary muscles, and cardiac muscle, the smooth muscle or the unstriated muscles comes under the involuntary muscles. Okay, based on what we have discussed so far, what do you think the differences between these would be? So voluntary muscles are the effectors for which the body can control, or if I want to move something, or pick up an objects which are around me, I can move my legs or hands by my own will. Okay, so I am able to control them. But the involuntary muscles like cardiac muscle and the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, that is heart muscle, so I can't able to control the function of my heart, isn't it? So it is involuntary, out of my control. And the intestine consists of the involuntary muscles, lungs consists of the involuntary muscles for the breathing process, and several other, just like the iris muscles. Okay, these are the involuntary muscles which we cannot control them. They will be responding, or they will be in action according to the requirement of the body. Okay, so now let us go through these in text questions. So what is the difference between a reflex action and walking? So reflex action is it is the thing that happens unintentionally or suddenly without my voluntary control, isn't it? Whereas walking is something that I can do, isn't it? So if I want to walk or if I want to run, so my skeletal muscles will be responding accordingly, and it can be done, isn't it? And even sometimes in some cases, walking or running can also be involuntary. Okay, in the case of predation, this can be seen clearly. What happens at the synapse between two neurons? So at the junction between the two neurons, as we have discussed, the synaptic vesicles of the above neuron will be transmitting or sending the neurotransmitters to the synapse, and from these synapse the next nerve will be sensing these neurotransmitters, and it will be passing on the electrical impulse to the next neuron or to the muscle junction, which is called as neuromuscular junction. Okay, which part of the brain maintains the posture and equilibrium of the body? Yes, obviously it is cerebellum, or the part of the hindbrain which controls the equilibrium and posture of the body. How do we detect the smell of an agarbatti or incense stick? So how can we detect smell? It is with the help of olfactory receptors, isn't it? So with the help of olfactory receptors, we are going to sense the smell. What is the role of the brain in reflex action? So obviously there is no significant role of the brain in reflex action. Okay, there is no significant, or there is no much important role of the brain, because the action is taken up by the spinal cord. Okay, from the receptor to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord to the muscle for the action or the effect. It is done without the involvement of the brain. Okay, so that's all about the control and coordination in animals. So in the next video, we will discuss about coordination in plants, and we are also had chemical coordination. It will be discussed in the next chapter.